much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I'm a huge, huge fan of this movie. It is one of my favorites of the year. And this is primarily an audience of your fellow SAG actors. So I actually always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
I got my SAG card 275 years ago when I was 12 years old or something. And I was started off in high school as a little bit dabbling as a child actor. I did after school special with Madeline Kahn and Keith Sarabica. I did a movie of the week with Forrest Whitaker was in it, and Blair Brown and Armando Sante and Beverly D'Angelo. And then I did a movie called School Tips. I did some small parts and small things, and the kind of thing that basically once you paid for your SAG membership, you lost money on the project, but it was worth it.
It's evened out at this point, I hope.
Yeah, yes. When I joined SAG, I think it was $800.
Wow,
so
you're kidding.
I think it's gone up. My friend was a local casting director in Boston and just sort of randomly brought me in. And the first thing I did was this little TV series called Voyage of the Mimi for children. And after that, I had some connections and experience acting. And so, I auditioned for some random stuff and periodically sort of what must have been accidentally because I had no idea what I was doing, got the parts. And yeah, I was profoundly impressed by the movie stars I was working with and the people. I was intimidated and daunted and thrilled I knew who Madeline Kahn was. I knew who Beverly D'Angelo was and Forrest Whitaker. It was it was a big deal to me. They were people I really looked up to.
Wow, that's so neat. This brings us all the way to The Way Back. This film is so smart and authentic and in some ways kind of unexpected. I actually didn't know where it was going for a lot of it. And I just thought it was very real.
Very, very different. Although the accountant, what I was interested in about it was that it had some sort of interesting performance stuff along with, what I had grown a little bit tired of, which was carrying a gun around and shooting people and doing action stuff. Not there's anything wrong with that, but it just, after a while, it's less interesting for your brain at the end of the day. But we had the character was autistic and we had done some sort of interesting stuff and some humorous stuff. And so when I read the Way Back script, and I also knew Gavin had experience doing movies with sports in it and done them really well, like Miracle, for example, and Warrior. I approached him and I thought he'd be the perfect guy for it. He really responded to the script. He had looked at it before and was aware of it and liked it. And I knew that. So it just was one of those things that sort of worked out. We immediately went to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers said, yes, we'll do it, for this amount of money. And which is fair. That's the nature of small dramas. And, I was just thrilled they wanted to do it and thrilled that I got the chance to play a part like that. Really for me, it was about reconnecting to my love for acting, the reason why I started doing this in the first place. I had sort of, as you go along in your career, it's easy to get, distracted by things like, the box office or what kind of movie or what they say on Instagram or what, all kinds of other things that don't really have anything to do with acting, and this was just about a performance and my desire to really feel like in touch with myself as an actor and to try to express the entire range of my emotions. I feel like I've become a better actor as I've gotten older, as I've become a director. I've learned a lot more. And I just felt, it was just one of those things where I felt really locked in. Other actors will kind of understand this, but you just sort of feel sometimes like you're in the zone, you're connected to the character. You feel like you can fluidly do what's required. It's interesting. Your best work is often feels the easiest. It's the worst stuff that is hard, the blood from a stone kind of thing. And this was so rich and textured, and I had such wonderful co-stars, and Gavin was so supportive that I just felt, even though it was a depressing story about a guy who is an alcoholic and loses his child and has a divorce and has like everything bad that can happen to you happen to him, it was a really joyful experience for me acting-wise. And I think actors will uniquely understand that because it's not really about what actually happened. Does my character win the lottery or something like that? It's actually about, can I successfully and realistically reproduce these complex and nuanced emotions? And you feel a profound sense of success and satisfaction and pride when you feel like you are able to. And for me, that's not always the case. Some days I feel really frustrated and unhappy, and I'm very critical with myself. But this really, kind of taught me to love acting again. I adore the movie. I'm really proud of the performance. If I had to pick one movie to show people, to say, well, what's your favorite acting movie? It would definitely be this one, among, I think, I don't know, 49 or 50 movies.
Wow.
There was definitely discussions about the big game and him showing up. I think that aspect of it was really important to Gavin, who wanted to do a different kind of sports movie. He felt like the Hoosiers ending, although Hoosiers is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I referenced Hoosiers constantly, and I don't know if Gavin liked that. I think he wanted to do something different, like directorially, which was sort of his purview. For me, whether you see the big game or you don't, what was important to me was that the character be realistic, that I be allowed to explore the character thoroughly and honestly, and also that the notion of recovery in the movie be handled not as an easily thing that's tied up with a bow and resolved in a kind of simple, neat way, but also is quite hopeful, because in fact, as we sometimes should be reminded, like, the world is actually full of a lot more recovered and healthy former alcoholics than it is practicing alcoholics. And that's a really good thing, that he's somebody who finds help and finds happiness, a form of happiness, despite tremendous tragedy and loss in his life, despite addiction in his life, despite divorce in his life. He finds a reason to live, a desire to live, a way to feel happy, that isn't sort of convenient and neat, but rather kind of honest and has integrity. And that felt really, really nice to me. The idea that life isn't about everything turning out the way you want it to turn out. It's about you finding a way to live that feels honest and has integrity to you.
You've spoken a lot about some of the real life parallels between your life and Jack's. Do you feel you have a lot in common? And some people would think, well, that makes it easier to play. But I actually think it's more challenging to play a character that's kind of close to yourself.
That's a very kind of reductive and simplistic perspective on acting, usually one held by people who aren't actors. I mean, obviously, you're not going to, you go into any AA meeting and pick somebody out and they'll be great as an alcoholic in a movie. It's just like picking anyone off a football team doesn't make them great in your movie playing a football player. It does help to have experience and intimacy and familiarity with the subject matter that you're working with, which is why I'm very research-based, both as an actor and as a director. But also, frankly, and fortunately for me, in the most important ways, my life is really quite different from this character's. Aside from the fact that we're both recovering alcoholics, we have very, very little in common. This is a very different guy. I mean, he's 40 pounds heavier than me. And he's a former professional athlete, for another thing, and or semi-professional athlete, and and he's a guy who's gone through a kind of suffering which, thank God, I haven't had to go through in terms of the loss of his child. So, and that's really the principal event in his life that he's dealing with. So, no, I don't think I'm particularly overly more similar to this character than I am to others, like maybe more than, say, to Bruce Wayne, but like other real people, not really. And no, I don't think that it matters that you have to hire somebody who is actually the person that they're playing. I think it's more important to have an actor that can do things realistically. And I've seen that, from the directing side quite a bit, where I feel like, okay, the best actor for this part has no experience with this kind of life, and yet they're the most convincing and compelling.
Was there any special additional research you took on? And not just for the character, but even basketball. Like, I don't know if you knew the sport backwards and forwards and plays the way that Jack does.
That was the biggest part of the research for me, was knowing the basketball, but it's not really my sport. I'm not particularly athletic. And so I had to do a lot of research to be authentic as a basketball coach. I had to, for example, know what it meant to call plays and what the plays looked like and how you run a team. I've never been a coach of a team other than my son's little league team, which is quite different. And Gavin really wanted that to have authenticity, obviously. So that was the most research I had to do. I also met with support groups for families who lost children, which was obviously quite painful. And I'm grateful to people who permitted me access to their experiences. I kind of wanted to know not just what it was like in the obvious ways, but some of the incongruities about the things you wouldn't expect about how you feel and what happened. Because I think audiences are more interested in dramas when they're surprised by them than when they sort of know what's coming. But yeah, the basketball was the main research for me.
See, for some reason, I just assumed this is me being reductive. I assume all guys know basketball and have coached at some point in their life. And one of the things I love about this movie is that it uses basketball, but it's not about basketball.
Yeah,
And
basketball is kind of a metaphor in a way for life, which a lot of sports are, and which is why sports are good for developing young people in particular, because you learn a lot of life lessons about, winning and losing and trying your best and teamwork and leadership and camaraderie and, winning with grace and losing with dignity. And there is something really profound about the way in which people bond, in sports. And I thought that was helpful and interesting. And really, what it's about is that, this guy comes along and is supposed to give something to these young men. And in fact, they give much more to him, I think, than he does to them, which is they reinvigorate his interest and enthusiasm for life, which is a theme that I hadn't worked with since Good Will Hunting, really. And in this case, I was on the other side of the coin.
I would actually love to talk about working with the rest of the cast because it is such a great ensemble.
They were all
athletes.
actors. They were definitely working with them. I love Michaela. I love Janina. I love everybody in the movie. But the experience itself of working with young men and kind of being a sort of quasi mentor to them in the same way that I was supposed to be a mentor to them in the movie was a really neat parallel. And I felt as though, I kind of needed to win their respect as an older actor in order to win their respect genuinely on screen. And I used that as a litmus test for kind of how well I was doing, how well I was fostering my relationship with these guys like Melvin Gregg, who are, extraordinary actors, extraordinary young men, Charles Locke Jr. It just, there was, these were really young guys who were really excited just to be acting. And it reminded me of like being in School Ties, where I had 9 lines and I had to memorize a bunch of football plays and didn't get a lot of close-ups, but just loved being part of the process, loved making movies, loved being in it. And, that was really inspiring and moving to me, that part of it. And I love those guys. I'm still on a group chat with them. I root for them. I'm so glad to see them continuing to be successful. And, just being around young actors whose conversations mostly revolved around like casting directors and what auditions they got and what auditions they didn't. And hey, can you call so-and-so? In fact, one of the actors was a finalist for a part with a director I knew and asked me to call the director, and I did, and he ended up getting the part, probably despite my recommendation. Was a really satisfying, fun thing. It's fun to live vicariously through young people who are like starting out and doing it for the love of it. It wasn't about being famous for them. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about attention. It wasn't about anything except they loved acting and they wanted to be actors.
You said you felt you had to earn their respect, but to some degree, like when you were young and you're, working with someone like Madeline Kahn or Beverly D'Angelo, were you aware that they might sort of be intimidated by you?
Not at all. I was a kid. I don't think they were intimidated by me. I think they thought I was a sort of like slightly irritating, 15-year-old who was asking too many questions. And, they tolerated me more likely. I don't think, I'm not still used to the idea that anyone would feel intimidated by me. It's still weird to me when people say like, excuse me, sir, or like, I walk into the room and all of a sudden everyone acts like they're working. It's like, well, when did I become that guy? You know what I mean? When do I become like older than other people, older than the director? I'm very accustomed to being the youngest person on the set and that being kind of who I am. And really more having to sort of feel like I have to prove myself that I deserve to be successful despite how young I am, because I became successful as a relatively young person. And so it's still something I'm growing accustomed to, this idea that, you know, people sort of, even people who are like, you know, in their 30s will say to me like, hey, I grew up watching your movies. And I just think, oh my God, this is very depressing, but it's also nice, you know, and it's like I just worked with Adam Driver, and he was telling me
Oh,
about how he's like, I remember when I was young and I saw Good Will Hunting, and I thought, oh my God, I thought we were the same age, you know, but it was,
really?
or when I worked with Blake Lively and she was like, how do you know Jason Bourne? You know, it's been a kind of an interesting process to mature in this business,
Yeah.
where there is no seniority, where there is no sort of certainty, where you're only as good as your last job and the next time the phone rings, and it's very tough in that way. And so it's been hard for me to have a sense that like, hey, okay, you know, I've actually kind of achieved something and had a career, and to feel proud about that, because I'm still inside that actor who's worried about, you know, the phone ringing.
Mm. I'm curious, when people do the excuse me, sir, what is it they usually want to talk about? Is there a particular movie or role or?
You know, people are really kind in person. You know, it's real life. Thank God is not like the internet. You know, people are actually, when they approach you in real life, are really pleasant and lovely and kind and interested. And if you're willing to talk to them about what you do for a living, they're really interested and they want to hear about it often. And usually, in my experience, it's about like, hey, how can I do this? You know, I
Mm.
see what you've done. I'd like to try to do this. What's your advice? What do you think is a good approach? And that's not an easy question to answer. It changes. And I wish I had a better answer. In fact, it's something that I've tried to answer so many times in my life that we went through the whole process of making Project Greenlight just as a way of having an easy answer for that question. But mostly that's what it centers on. Or people will be nice about a movie or two and say, hey, that movie meant something to me because of X or Y, or my family was like that, or something like that. And this movie, I'd like to think it's because the movie's really moving. I also think it happened to come out right when the pandemic started and everyone was stuck at home and had to stream something. So this was like the movie to watch, and a captive audience. But it's been one that's been particularly gratifying because people have, like, you know, said to me, hey, that was kind of emotionally satisfying for me in this way or that. And that's, at this point in my life and career, kind of what I care about the most. You know, I have my own set of standards now. I've stopped sort of focusing and worrying about, well, what's everyone else going to say or what's critics going to say, and rather just said, like, you know, either I'm going to be successful in the ways that I want to be successful, or I'm going to fail in those ways, and I'm going to have my own metrics for success and kind of live by that. And I'm much happier and much more comfortable living that way. And it's nice when that also dovetails with other kinds of success, but I genuinely take satisfaction, even if some people don't like the movie or it's not a big hit, to feel like, hey, yeah, I really like doing that and I got a lot out of it, you know?
I was going to ask because people really love this movie. Like, I haven't met anyone who didn't love this movie, and I don't think I'd want to talk to them if I did. But I wasn't sure if you were kind of aware of that feedback, because we haven't been able to go out and people can't come up to you and tell you how much they love you. But people are very passionate, and a lot of people get very emotional about this movie, and I don't know if that's been conveyed to you.
Somewhat because of email, you know, and I would say it's interesting. It's changed my approach to the whole streaming thing, because this is a movie I really wanted people to see. And theatrically, I thought it was a hard sell to get people to out of their house to pay a lot of money because they're accustomed to wanting to see big spectacle and that kind of thing. And this is the kind of thing that we're now becoming more accustomed to, like, I'll see it on, you know, iTunes later. But, and I thought, well, maybe that will make it feel less special somehow. But it's quite the opposite. I was really gratified because I probably got more emails about this than other movies that were much more financially successful. And that was really satisfying because it meant people were seeing the movie and liked it. And that meant a lot to me.
It was the last movie my mom saw in a theater, and she told me, she's like, well, if that's the last movie I ever see in a theater, at least I went out on top. So I was like, I love that. I was like, Mom, theaters will be back. It's okay.
Sort of take your work home with you. You know, there's like a line, I hate to quote my own movies, but it's an Alan Arkin line that I didn't write in Argo. He says, show business, the bullshit business. It's like coal mining. You go home and you can't wash it off your hands. There is something about the residual nature of the like emotional work that you do that you carry with you, I think. Some days more than others. But for me, it was really cathartic. It was really thrilling and satisfying. Like even deeply painful, emotional stuff actually felt great to me if I felt as though I was able to do it the way I wanted to. The scene where he gets fired, or the scene where he visits his son's grave, or the scene where he gives this inspiring speech to the kids. It's like, to be able to kind of get to those places and accomplish my work the way I wanted to do was much, much more satisfying and thrilling than was depressing, the sort of feelings that I had to endure to go through that to get there. Oftentimes you have those feelings and there's no benefit. They just have those negative feelings on their own. In this case, this was like, there was a reason for it, and I loved it.
Do you have a way that sort of helps you get into character for really challenging scenes? Is there music you listen to, or do you sort of need to be alone? And any sort of process?
It's very elusive. I know a lot of actors have a lot of different approaches. For me, it kind of comes down to like, is the writing good? Do I understand the character? Do I sort of feel it? And yeah, there are usually a few touchstones that I use. Like, okay, this is sort of what I'm going to think of during this moment, and this thing is going to. And oftentimes they're not obvious. They're not related. It could be, a yellow raincoat I saw once walking down the street when I was in the middle of a conversation, having a breakup with some girl in 1996. But like for whatever reason, and oftentimes they tend to be not exactly like the girl you had the breakup with, but the raincoat you saw, because somehow your emotion transfers more effectively to that than something too direct. Mm-hmm. So there are tools that I use and techniques that I've stolen from others, and ways that I approach this. But especially with emotional stuff, you have to have some way of generating. I'm not somebody who fakes it well. That's just not the way I do it. It's not the Olivier sort of school of like, well, you pretend and you just pretend really well. I mean, there's the outside in approach and the inside out. Outside in is you sort of create the face that your face makes when you're upset, and that will in turn create feelings of being upset inside you. That's never worked as well for me as actually finding feelings that were similar and allowing them to kind of take over and take hold, and trying to sort of subconsciously or even consciously allow those to merge with the feelings of the character and become the character's feeling.
This movie looks so amazing, and you have a pretty large ensemble. So I don't think people are aware that it's essentially made on a pretty independent budget.
Days, you know what I mean? Like time to get performance right. Like I love that he wants that sort of 16 millimeter interesting look. I love the style that they used. Edu did a great job shooting the movie. I love the score. To me, a budget now is really just a reflection of like your opportunity to achieve, optimal quality. Do you have the time to do what you need to do? Even when I directed my first movie, I spent all my money on, smaller crew and more days and more time. Because I remember starting out as an actor feeling rushed and like didn't have time to get the stuff I wanted. I couldn't get the takes I wanted. And I thought, if I get the opportunity, this is what I'm going to place a premium on, is the time to get the performance right. Because naturally I'm an actor, so I believe performance is the most important thing in a movie, and it's what carries everything else. Writers probably have a different opinion, but to me, you get the performance right, and you have a movie that can affect people and can generate empathy and can connect people to it. And I think that's principally what movies as an art form do better than any other art form.
And as an actor and as a director, you've probably learned a lot over the years, what you like about directors, what you don't like about directors. When you show up to a set, what is it you hope for from a director?
Well, usually I've had a conversation or two with the director before I show up to the set. You don't want to show up to the set and meet the person for the first time, because you could be in for a nasty surprise. Obviously, you want someone whose priorities and whose taste kind of dovetail with your own. Somebody who understands that there is nuance and complexity to things, and who's interested in finding the surprising aspects of things rather than the obvious ones. Somebody who respects and understands the value of performance, and who wants the actors to succeed and give them the best opportunity they can to succeed. But ultimately, directing is taste, and it comes down to, is this someone who shares my taste, who shares my interest in something? And sometimes, I've worked with great directors, and we had very different opinions about the script, and ultimately that made it very hard because I wanted to play it one way, the director was interested in something else. Both versions might be honest performances, but I thought one was something I was more drawn to, and that's quite frustrating. So I think one of the really important things with a director is to make sure you're on the same page, because even though I think acting is paramount, it is the director's movie. And if you, as an actor, have the illusion that you're out there making your own movie, you're in for a rude awakening. It's going to be the director's movie. They're going to use what they want. They're going to make the movie they want. So it's quite wise to point your ship in the same direction as theirs, or follow theirs, and adhere, try to accomplish what they want. Give them something extra. Give them something more interesting. Add stuff onto it. Don't just give them, what they minimally hope for or expect, but don't depart too much from what they think is interesting and what they want, because they just won't use it.
You mentioned how this film sort of helped you rediscover your love of acting, and I know there's no one way.
I try not to put myself in that situation. It is the older I get, the more I do, the less interested I am in doing things that don't engage me emotionally or psychologically or intellectually. And I just feel like it's just suffering, because it's what you love, it's what you want to do. And yet, you think it's at worst, stupid and meaningless, or, maybe just mediocre. And that's not interesting. And function of the way you make movies, depending on who you work with, but with anybody, you're going to do it multiple times. You're going to explore it from multiple angles and multiple ways. And so if you don't like it, it just means you have to go through something unpleasant more times. If you do like it, it's a wonderful opportunity to enrich what you're doing. If you don't, it's just more suffering. And so I really am trying, like this next movie I'm doing, Tender Bar, that's being directed by George Clooney. I'm really excited about it. It's a performance-based, character-based piece, not a big, fancy, huge movie, but it's something that, I'm really drawn to. And, the choices that I'm making in my career now and that I'm interested in mean that I don't make as much money. They're probably not on as many screens. It's not a big splashy marketing campaign and so on. And they maybe have to fight for attention more, but they're movies that I'm really interested in and I'm satisfied doing. And I'm proud of showing my kids, if I could ever convince my kids to watch my movies, which one day perhaps they will. And I can't, I just don't want to be bored. You know what I mean? When I was starting out, I just took anything that I could, just the opportunity to keep advancing myself, as long as I have opportunities, and that it may go away and I may be forced to do something at some point that I think is only mildly interesting or less than interesting. But while I have the chance to do, A or B or C, I'm always going to opt right now, at least, for the thing that generates the most passion, enthusiasm, and interest in me, because I want to, produce the best performance. And I feel like the best actor that I've ever been. I mean, I just finished this movie with Ridley Scott in the Middle Ages, playing this very eccentric, sort of royal character. And I mean, I just loved it. You know what I mean? And Ridley's he's a very visual director. He's very into production design. He was a production designer, a camera operator. He doesn't do a ton of takes. He does a really interesting technique that I think is really good for actors, which he shoots with multiple cameras. So everyone's kind of on camera at the same time. So you don't have that sort of, I'm going to relax while we do your coverage sort of experience. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved making these choices and doing this performance and making something out of it that I didn't expect. And I was one of the writers with Nicole Holofcener and Matt Damon. So lately acting has been more exciting to me than ever. And maybe I'm a late bloomer. Maybe it's just where I am in my life, but I feel really, really engaged and alive as an actor right now. And I really look forward to, doing stuff that I like, the way back, if I'm lucky enough to get the opportunity to find scripts like that.
Well, it's such a wonderful movie, and a large part of that is obviously all the fantastic performances. I had no idea Al Madrigal was such a great actor too.
That's great.
He's
What
so
an interesting
great.
guy, what a smart guy, what a funny guy, what a kind guy, and like really kind of understood the nature of his role and how to do it. I loved him. I love seeing him every day. I loved, his relationship with the young guys was really
Yeah.
special. And enough good things can't be said about Janina Javankar either, who is a
Oh my
wonderful,
gosh.
extraordinary actress, a passionate, compassionate, enthusiastic artist, and Michaela is funny and warm and really easy to play scenes with. No matter how you choose to play it, she can change right along with you. And she definitely, and Janina, made me much, much better. I owe them a huge debt. So I was really lucky that top to bottom, I got to work with a wonderful ensemble. And I love the fact that they were all known actors with careers, but none of them had profiles so dominant that you came in with a strong preconceived notion about them, but you allowed the characters to sort of surprise you.
And what I think is one of your best. I want to thank you so much for being here, for spending time with us, and I want to thank everyone who's watching at home so much. And actually, The Way Back is available on streaming, so you can watch it over and over again.
It is, and thank you very much. It's like it's interesting because I started off as an actor, always wanted to be an actor, and then got famous sort of as a writer, and then worked as a director and as a producer, and have had a lot of focus on other things besides acting in a lot of ways, just pure acting. And that's what this was for me. This was my way of affirming to myself, like, I am a real actor. I deserve to do this. I should have the opportunity to do this. I want to do something really special just as an actor. And I'm deeply grateful for the people who afforded me the opportunity to do that, and humbled by it, and profoundly proud of the movie. So I hope if you haven't watched it, you do.
Well, you've always been a great actor. Chasing Amy remains just, I think, one of the most stunning performances I've ever seen. But this movie is really, really special, and you're so fantastic in it.
I think my performance tops even that of Chasing Amy, dare I say. I watched Chasing Amy. I tried to show my kids like 10 minutes of Chasing Amy the other day. And they go, "Dad, this movie looks like it was made in the 90s. I was like, that's because it was made in the 90s. And they're more interested in mall rats than Chasing Amy, because I play a character who works at a place called The Fashionable Male and wears what they call 90s suits. And they like movies where they get to make fun of me more. So luckily for them, there are a few of those too.
That's amazing. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.